Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and this is day 16 of a build a day until they announce DLC. That's right, we're doing a build or build related video every single day until they announce DLC, so be sure to sub. And in the meantime, this is a list and a follow up on my last video of 5 overpowered builds that you can do at level 150 to stay meta relevant. These are absolutely a blast. You have to check these out. A lot of fun to do, and let's get into it with the lightning build to start. This build utilizes Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike to the best of its ability, and you can absolutely do this at 150. I recently went and did it on New Game Plus 7 at 150, and it was an absolute blast. By the way, all the related videos are going to be in the description below, so for further detail, you can use that as a reference. There'll be 5 of them. They'll be in there. The links will be in there, so you can go there and get more information about each of these individual builds. Although we're going to go through stats, equipment, everything you'll need to know anyway. If you need any additional information, including the written in the description, everything you need for each build, they're in those videos. Now for Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike, I did some of these on horseback too, and that was really fun. That was a really good time. If you haven't tried to use ADLS on horseback after buffing it, definitely give it a try. You can one-shot a lot of the dragons in the game, and it's an absolute blast to do that too. And it's very, very easy to pull off given its wide range and extreme power against dragons because they're weak to lightning. And in that video, we took on a lot of the field bosses and a few main bosses like Mogh, I think Golden Shade, but we were able to one-shot a whole bunch of stuff on New Game Plus 7 at 150, so this is one of those builds that's overpowered at 150. Just need 80 faith. We're going to go over stats and equipment and everything you'll need to know here because this is a really powerful build and something you definitely should try. For the 150 setup, we went with the Gravelstone Seal plus 25. We have a Seppuku Sword to bring your HP down. We have the Jellyfish Shield, Black Dumpling swapped out for the Mushroom Crown, Godfrey Icon, Lightning Scorpion Charm, Red Feathered Branch Sword, Kindred of Rot's Exaltation, the Lightning Tier. Of course, you can use the Faith or Bubble Tier as well. And then we have Fetid Pots and Boluses to poison proc us and get that extra damage. For the 150 stats, we went with 80 faith, and that's the biggest deal here. Everything else really is up to you. You're going to need a little bit of mind, and obviously you want some vigor as well and such. But as far as the actual build itself goes, it's all based off of your faith stat. ADLS scales purely with faith, so at least 80 would be your primary stat. So you're going to want 80 there, and anything else really is up to you, but you're going to have a lot of power as long as you reach that 80 faith. Next one up here is Moghwyn's Sacred Spear. Moghwyn's Sacred Spear is an absolute blast. It rages absolute destruction. It does massive fire damage and massive bleed, and you can have a fantastic build for it at level 150. Now, I know some people aren't a fan of being a standing target with Moghwyn's Sacred Spear, but in most cases, if you're able to come up with a really fantastic build for it, it doesn't matter, because it's much like Marius Executioner's Sword, where you can literally just do a lot of damage off of a slow weapon art. Like, yes, it's slow, but the damage that you're getting in return is ridiculous. And assuming you can time it and have the right placement, you're going to do massive damage. And any boss that you're going to run into for the majority of the game is going to get completely obliterated by this weapon art. If they can bleed, it's going to destroy them. If they're weak to fire, it'll destroy them as well. One of the only few bosses that I didn't like it against was Elden Beast. Every other boss in the game, when I did a run through with just Moghwyn's Sacred Spear, ended up being very easy. This is a fantastic weapon with a really powerful weapon art. And for a lot of bosses in the game too, you'll have that chance to be able to stand there and use the weapon art, especially slower bosses and such. The faster ones, it could be a little bit more difficult, but it absolutely shreds. This is perhaps my favorite bleed weapon in the game as well because it's kind of an interesting one. I know a lot of the common stuff is using Seppuku and then doing jump attacks, and we do have a build in there that relates to that. But as far as Moghwyn's Sacred Spear, it's pretty unique and fun to use, at least in terms of bleed, and you get that fire damage here too, which can destroy Radagon because guess what? He's got 0 fire resistance, and obviously we're going to take advantage of that. Now, as I mentioned before, it's not that great on Elden Beast, but as far as Radagon or the majority of the bosses in the game, they get absolutely destroyed by it. A lot of the demigods, too, have 0 fire resistance, including Melania, Godfrey, Morgott, Radagon, and such. So they're going to take that fire damage while also getting the bleed damage as well. It does absolutely insane damage when you combine the two. Now, for this awesome setup, we have Moghwyn's Sacred Spear plus 10. We have the Dragon Communion Seal, because why not? It scales with Arcane. We have the White Mask, Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman, we have the Fire Scorpion Charm and Lord of Blood's Exaltation, and then I believe we're using the Fire tier and then the Faith tier as well for buffs because that'll save us 10 levels and let us use Golden Vow, and then Blessing's Boon if we want to as well. For our stats at 150, the primary thing that you got to look at here is the weapon art scales mostly with Arcane, and that's going to be your bleed buildup. So you want to heavily go into Arcane with a secondary in Strength, and then a decent amount of Vigor and obviously Mind and whatnot as well. But everything here at 150 turned it into a really powerful build, and once again, you can go with 15 Faith and get that to 25 to do some extra buffs, as long as you're using the Faith tier. That'll actually save you 10 levels, which is pretty awesome. And next up, we have another awesome build, and this one is obviously Bleed as well. We're going to go with Bleed and Frost. The last one we covered Bleed and Bleed, so we're going to be doing Bleed and Frost at 150 using these Scavenger curved swords, which are ridiculously overpowered given the fact that they have Arcane scaling when you set them to Occult. And then we're going to be using Chilling Mist on the offhand one so that we can get Frost without really needing intelligence. So basically we can get Frost without having to scale with intelligence, which saves us a bunch of levels and allows this build to be very powerful and obviously overpowered, because pretty much anything at this point with the Scavenger curved swords is overpowered. Big thing here is the fact that you can put them on Occult, you can go with high Arcane, and you can get a ridiculous amount of damage while also getting innate bleed that scales with the Occult setting on it, which gives you incredible damage. And then we throw in Frost with Chilling Mist. Don't even really need much intelligence as far as this build goes, no pun intended there. But yeah, you're going to have that scaling without having the intelligence on it, because you can have a little bit of innate Frost on it naturally, and then Chilling Mist will add, I believe, some level of Frost, whether it be 40 or 60 or whatever, for 40 seconds as long as that sword is lit up. And as you can see there, Mogh disappeared and we raged absolute destruction, and this is on the max scaling of the game, and it does ridiculous damage. One thing to note about the Bleed Frost build, by the way, is obviously I think pure Bleed is better, but you can always switch them back to Occult if you run into a boss that is immune to Bleed, like Elden Beast, and you can still shred them with the consecutive attack bonuses, successive attack bonuses, and whatnot. So we have one on Occult, and then one obviously Magic with a little bit of innate Frost before Chilling Mist. Any seal will do. White Mask, Raptor's Black Feathers, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Claw Talisman, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Blisten's Prosthesis, the consecutive successive attack tier, and then we have the Faith tier for buffs as well. For the stats at 150, your primary stats Arcane here, because when you're going to be on Occult, that natural bleed, that innate bleed that's on it is going to scale with Occult, and then you're going to get high damage while also having bleed. And then obviously you don't need too much invested as far as intelligence goes, because we're going to be using Chilling Mist, which coats it with that extra Frost, so we can get the Frost on top of the bleed. And then Occult is just going to scale mainly off Arcane, so it's basically one stat and then everything else is up to you. Next up, and this made the cut again, is the Fire build, because it can be done at 150 and it's mainly done at level 150. So we're going to go over the stats and everything you need to know for this. This made it into the last video, but I wanted to highlight this one. It's one of the most fun builds I've ever done in Eldenring, a pure Fire build that scales almost purely off of Faith. It's absolutely awesome. Does a lot of damage. The magma blades are great, and then you get to do a bunch of fire incantations as well to boot, making it a very, very fun build to do in Eldenring. Now, the magma blades are a pain to farm for, trust me. I had somebody recently tell me that it took them 9 hours to get them, which is pretty crazy. I mean, that really is. I wish they would fix some of the rates on these drops. It took me 4 hours to get 2. But if you have the time to invest, they're one of the few things that's actually worth farming for. I mean, it's really worth grabbing them. They're excellent. You don't really need 2 to spam the weapon art, but I like having 2 for style and if you want to do jump attacks and stuff like that as well. But then again, the Faith is mainly the Ash of War, and then obviously if you're doing jump attacks, that's going to scale more with strength on these weapons, because they are a strength weapon. However, again, the Ash of War is almost purely Faith. For this setup, we have dual magma blades, dual giant seals, double down on the boost. We have the Black Dumpling if need be, Shard of Alexander, Godfrey Icon, Ritual Swords Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, and then obviously we have the Fire tier as well to do massive fire damage. And the stats at 150 here are very similar to the Lightning build, by the way. You can do pretty much both those builds kind of interchangeably without having to spend a Larval Tear, by the way, because your main thing, again, is getting that Faith to between 60 and 80, and then everything else is really secondary to that. So you're going to need the minimum requirements on the weapon, but the Ash of War scales, and I've tested this many times, almost primarily with Faith. So it's all Faith again, and you can swap this out and do the Lightning build if you want to as well, simply by changing talismans in your setup without having to spend a Larval Tear. The next build, by the way, is the one-hit Giant Crusher build. This is the pure bonk build, and honestly, you can do it at 150 simply by investing a lot in strength, and you can one-hit a lot of the bosses in the game. This character wasn't on max scaling. I believe it was somewhere in between Journey 3 and 4, I think around there, and it was still able to one-hit a lot of the field bosses and such, and some of the main game bosses as well. It does get harder as it scales up. If you get into New Game Plus 7 territory, it becomes really difficult, but as you can see here with the magma worm and then the dog, both get one hit very, very easily on those. And it's just awesome. This is definitely an overpowered build, and anything that gives you trouble later on, you can pretty much two-hit. So for this setup, we have the Fire Crusher on at this moment. We have the Seppuku Sword to bring your HP down. NEC will do. The Mushroom Crown and the Black Dumpling. Kindred of Rot's Exaltation. Fire Scorpion Charm. Axe Talisman. Red Feathered Branch Sword, and then we're using the Fire tier as well. And then in that video, it also has a description on how to do the Heavy Affinity version, which is slightly different. Both the Fire Crusher and Heavy Crusher will scale mainly with strength, unless you're using Flame Art, but I don't see why you would in this case, because then it would scale with Faith and you'd need another stat. In this instance, though, we're just going for high strength. That's all that really matters here. Get your strength up as much as possible, and then everything else is secondary, and you're going to be able to one-hit a lot of the bosses in the game, especially on your first couple new game cycles. And when you do land that one hit or that one bonk, it's hilarious, and it's also a ton of fun. There is nothing like it as far as Eldenring goes. It's one of the most fun things that I've done. The absolute one-hit build is a blast. Alright, there you have it. There's day 16 of a build or build video every single day until they announce DLC. We're going to continue doing this. We're going to see how far we can go with this. I'm going to occasionally do lists like this to catch people up in kind of like lieu of a build, basically. And it ended up being 5 builds anyway, but at the same time, so I can kind of catch those up that can't catch every single video, can't see every video, and this way you can kind of get caught up. So every once in a while, we'll do a list as well. But we're going to continue to try to do a build every single day until they announce DLC to keep this entertaining and to see how far we can go with this. There's a ton of awesome builds on my channel. Be sure to check all those out. Everything you need to know is in the description below. Have a great day, and thanks for watching.